Okay, brakes. I'm really big on brakes. Brakes are important, and I like really, really good brakes for a couple of reasons. Number one, they help you stop when you're going really, really fast. And secondly, you can use your brakes to really significantly improve your lap times. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the first thing you need to know about brakes is actually energy. Now, the Mustang is what, 37,800 pound lump of mass rocketing down the straightaway at 120 miles an hour. And there's only a few ways to slow it down or stop it. You know, trees, guardrails, and concrete barriers are the least desirable, although they are very effective. It's more desirable to use your brakes. So what happens when you put your foot on the brake pads and rotors take that kinetic energy of that mass moving at high speed and turn it into heat energy. That's why brakes get so hot. They're taking kinetic energy and converting it into heat energy. And by converting it into heat energy, they're slowing that mass down. So that's why, you know, a lot of people understand the importance of knowing the heat in your braking and your brake pads and your rotors. So we're going to start with it. See, so I got a lot of stuff hanging around here. I think I'll start with my my big old rotor back here. Okay, this is a two-piece slotted rotor. I'll tip this down a little bit. If you can't afford a big brake package and you want to improve your brakes, get a hold of this. We'll get you set up with two-piece slotted rotors. Now, two-piece slotted rotors do a lot of things. First, they're lighter than the factory. Secondly, they have these slots. Now, what these slots do is it has two functions. One is to help clear brake dust. The second is when you've got a brake pad on a rotor at high temperature, they actually will build up gas on the trailing edge of the pad. Back in the early days in the '86 Saleen cars, in the racing the Escort, the SCCA Pro Endurance Series, I mean, we had obviously had to change brakes multiple times in 12 and 24-hour races. What happened is the brake pads would come off and the fronts would be worn out and the back of the pad would about half the brake pad there. Well, the reason for that is the gases were building up at the trailing edge of the pad, and we weren't getting a good contact, so it was wearing the fronts out. By having these slots, it'll evacuate that gases that get trapped at the back of the pad. Okay, another thing is that because the outer ring is steel and the inner ring is aluminum, they don't really transfer as much heat from the rotor into the wheel bearing or into the wheel. So that's why they run so much cooler. And they're vented inside, so they actually pull the air out. Now, a brake rotor cools itself from the inside out, which is why we put brake ducts in the middle. We'll get to that in a minute. Another thing, while I've got this up here to talk about, is temperature. So the question is, how do you know what temperature your brakes are really running at? I know people ask if they can use a laser temperature thing to check their brake temperature. And no. All that's going to tell you is what the cool down temperature is of the rotors. What you want to know is what is the peak temperature of the rotors. I don't know if you've seen like endurance racing or at night, going into a corner, all of a sudden the brakes just glow bright red. That's because they're getting really, really hot. That's the temperature you want to know. What is the maximum temperature those pads are getting up to? Now, this little thing right here, that's called brake rotor paint. It's really handy stuff. I think we sell more of this than anybody else in the aftermarket. And it's one color. You know, back when I started, you had to have 5 different colors and you paint them all on, and each color would kick off at a different temperature. So you had to check all the temperatures to see what temperature your brakes were running at. But with this, it's just one color. It's really cool. And they give you a little chart that kind of tells you, let's see if you read that or not, but you match the color up to the temperature range, and that'll tell you what temperature your rotors are running. Now, mine typically run on my cars about 1,200 degrees, so I pick brake pads out accordingly. Now, see, because I got it up here, I want to touch on brake ducts. if you're doing track, you really have to cool your brakes. Like I say, my brakes on my Mustang run about 1,200 degrees with brake ducts. Without brake ducts, they'd be off the chart. And my brake ducts are completely unique, although somebody else is sort of copying it. But I've been doing this since SN95 days. But if you notice, it's not round. I use a 3-inch brake duct, but it's oval. Well, the reason for that is by making it oval, we can actually, if you can see, all of the air coming in goes directly into the eye of the rotor. So 100% of the air hits the eye of the rotor, and once it's in there, the vanes will pull it out. So that's why they're squished, because we can get all the air into the rotor. Now, there's some people have like 4-inch brake ducts, which you'd think would be better, except if you saw how that 3-inch just barely fit in there, a 4-inch actually like goes into part of the rotor. So that does a couple of things that aren't really good. Number one, it's putting air on the interface of the rotor. So it's actually getting a different flow of air than the outer side of the rotor. And also, as the air comes in and hits it, it kind of disrupts the flow because it has to tumble and go around it into the center. We did a back-to-back test, 2010, with my 3-inch brake ducts on my car and the 4-inch brake ducts on the Ford Racing FR500S cars. And the overall rotor temperature was similar. Mine was just a few degrees cooler, but the big difference is rotor temperature on mine was the same inside and out. Where with the 4-inch, it was cooler on the inside and hotter on the outside, which explained why the outside pads wore more than the inside pads. So that's why brake ducts are so important. Now that's the S197 brake duct. We've got it for SN95, again with the oval. And something interesting for the 550 cars, it got such a big rotor, we didn't have to squish it. So just a 3-inch hose goes straight into the rotor and cools it down. Okay, another important part of brakes is, there we go, braking is brake fluid. You really, if you go on track, you absolutely have to have high temperature brake fluid because the high heat will boil regular brake fluid. And what happens is it boils, you hit the brake pedal, and you got nothing. You got absolutely nothing. So we actually switched over a year or so ago to the Bear is having this formulated in the UK. And it's about the highest dry boiling point of 608. And it's a lot more cost effective than some of the fancy brand name brake fluids. So that's what we've switched to. And at the track, I tell people, bleed your brakes a lot. Bleed them before the event, bleed them Saturday, and bleed them Sunday. And I always like fresh brake fluid in my calipers. Okay, something else that if you don't get a big brake kit and you do tracks, stainless steel brake lines. But the reason for that is, stock brake lines are rubber, and certainly it's heavy duty, stress tested and all that. But when you start seeing really high temperatures in your brakes, the fluid's going to get hot, which means the brake line is going to get hot. And if rubber starts getting hot, it starts to get a little soft. So you do have the opportunity for, if you're getting really hot brakes, you hit the brake pedal, and that brake line is going to just a little bit, which is going to take some of your pedal feel away. Or if you've got stainless steel lines, they've got it's a solid Teflon inner lining, which means there's absolutely no give at all. I mean, you got a rock hard brake pedal no matter what. So that covers rotors, paint, ducts, fluid, lines. Now let's talk about brake pads themselves. Okay, here's a little chart I put together of the brake pad system that we've kind of developed. This is what we switched over to about a year or so ago. It's working out really, really well. And you can see each one of these brake pad compounds has a different operating range. And if the street performance goes from 0 to 800, now a regular OE type pad, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that they work from like -20 to maybe 300-400 degrees. But above that, they'll wear out really fast. There's three elements to brake pads: wear, heat, and friction. If you're living in the optimum range for the brake compound, you get good wear, good friction, and good heat. If you have a compound in like a street pad that on track, and you start getting above the operating range of the compound, then the wear increases dramatically and the friction decreases dramatically. So that's why I always have to pick the right brake pad for the right application. So these are the pads that we now offer, and I'll kind of go through them. The street pad, street performance is good from 0 to 800, which is a little more than other performance street pads. And then we've got an autocross pad, which goes from 0 to 1,000, which should be more than enough temperature to handle brake temperatures on autocross. In fact, a lot of autocross could probably get by with the street performance, but the autocross pad up to 1,000 degrees would be even better. And then there's the novice track. If it's first time or so on track, then you're not going to see really high brake temperatures because you're not going to really get into really hard braking. But after a couple of events, you're going to start braking harder and harder, and the temperature is going to continue to rise. So the going from 74 to 1250. Now this is also a pad you could drive to the track, although because it's more of an aggressive compound, I really wouldn't be recommended for daily driving because you'd probably pick up some dust and noise because it'd be operating below its desired operating temperature. But that's from 74 to 1250. Kind of gets you through the first couple of track days, and you can drive it to the track. Now the next pad up is from 118 to 1400. My brakes on my car run about 1200 degrees, and this would be an okay pad for that. But that 1200 degrees is really close to 1400 degrees. I want to be closer to the middle of the operating range. So the next pad up goes from 173 degrees to 1800. That is kind of like a really good pad for track days because if you're running 1200 degrees, that's sort of in the middle, and that's where you want to be. But there's like little combinations like that. For a lot of track people, I'll have them use the 1800 and 1400, 18 on the front, 14 on the back. Maybe for some people that really aren't advanced, might even go with 1400 front and 1200 rear. And then we keep going up from there. I mean, the harder you drive, the faster you go. The more aggressive brake pads you need, the more temperature you make. And then we've got a race pad that's from 225 up to 2100. And then we've got a pro race pad that goes from 610 to 2100. Now you really need to match your pad to your temperature. I talked to a gentleman maybe 2 weeks ago in one of my 15-minute consults. We were talking about brake pads, and he said, the brand that we were using now, he didn't like them at all. He said they were terrible pads. And I said, well, what compound were you using? He said, I was using the 18. He said, the guy that sold it to me, he said, I have a heavy car, it was GT500. I have a heavy car, I needed the best brake pad. Well, you take a look at that, and the operating range is from 610 to 2100, which means that, if your brake pads aren't operating in that 14, 15, 1600 range, they're out of range. So what's happening, he had too aggressive a pad. He wasn't getting them nearly hot enough. So they didn't work very well. They made a lot of dust and they squeaked. That's something, if you ever hear like a car on track, on a racetrack and the brakes squeak, their compound is too hard. They need to drop down a temperature range. So that's why it's important getting the right range for what you're doing. And you can, if you're interested and need to have some direction, sign up for one of my 15-minute consults. We'll talk about your car, what you're doing, and I'll come up with some compounds for you. The other thing is these can be pre-bedded. Now, what is brake bedding? Well, anytime you've got like a competition pad, they have to be bedded. What that means is they have to reach critical temperature so all the volatiles from manufacturing boil out of the pads. And that's done by repeated high-speed stops. Stop, let it cool a little bit, stop, let it cool a little bit. And you keep doing that until one time you hit the brakes really hard and the pedal is hard as a rock and you smell brakes. That tells you that that's the time to stop. and you take your foot off the brakes and you gently drive back to the pits, let them cool completely, and the next time you go on track, you have demon brakes. So with these, we can get them pre-bedded because typically that'll eat up at least one session bedding brake pads. And so this kind of eliminates that. You can just put them on and go. So, and then also with rotors, you need to kind of season them. You got new rotors. You can't go out and hammer the brakes. You got to, bring the temperature up gently to get to the point of operating. So that's why it's so important to get the right brake pad for the right application. If you've got too soft a brake pad, like the 1200, and you're running a Mustang pretty fast, and you're going to be right up on the edge of that 1200 degrees, and they're going to, will it take it? Yeah, it'll take it, but you're going to see a rapid increase in wear and a decrease in friction. So, and then the same thing, if you get too aggressive a pad, it's just the opposite. It's not going to work. So, okay, that's my little chart on brake pads. I think that's everything on brakes today.